So in this week's tutorial, what I thought I would do is run through the differences between what a gradient and what an ombre is, because there seems to be a little bit of confusion between the two of them, and sometimes ombre is used in place of a gradient and gradient is used in place of an ombre. So I'm going to clear that up for you hopefully today and show you a couple of techniques to make them work in soap. Now, a gradient is also known as a colour transition, and it's a gradual blending from one hue to one or more other hues, whereas an ombre is derived from the French word ombre, which means to shade. So essentially, it's the degree of lightness, darkness, or strength of a single colour. So a gradient is a gradual transition of a colour's hue into another hue or more, and an ombre is the gradual tint of a single colour. And there's a little diagram here I've done which will show you what I mean by an ombre and what I mean by a gradient. So here we have a ombre. So it starts at the darkest tone and moves up the bar to the lightest tone, but can be done in reverse. So you start at the lightest tone and work up to the darkest tone, but it's all a single colour. The gradient, on the other hand, has different hues running through it, and it might be 2 or 3 or 4 different hues, but as you can see in the diagram, that hue runs through it. So it's not necessarily getting any lighter or darker, but it's actually changing the colour of the soap as it moves through. So let's get on with our ombre soap. Now in my jug to the side here, you'll see I've got some colourant mixed in the bottom there. This is just a few colours I was throwing together, some reds, some blues, some purple that I've kind of put together to make a relatively dark coloured soap. And what we're going to do is we're going to split our batter down into 2 sections. The jug on the left hand side there with the spatula in it is going to be my darkest tone, and my jug that I'm actually mixing my soap into here is going to be my white or my light tone that I'm then going to add into this bucket gradually to dilute the colour that's already in that jug. And then as I pour it into the mould, we'll lighten that colour step by step by step. And eventually you'll come to the lightest tone. So we're just literally using 2 jugs, batter in one, colourant in the other. We'll mix the colourant into the first little bit of soap, and then we'll move through gradually creating a lighter colour on every step and then pouring that into the mould. Very simple way of doing it, and this is the easy way of creating an ombre soap. So now that we've come up to a relatively decent trace, now you need a trace on this particular soap that's going to give you enough time to work, but you'll also want to make sure that you put some sodium lactate or you put something in there to give you a little bit more of a harder bar, because often long working soaps don't harden up as quickly, so you want to be able to unmold this relatively well at the end. I forgot to do this, so my soap took a little bit of effort to get out of the mould at the end, but thankfully you don't have to watch that. So anyway, what we're going to do now is start pouring the soap from the jug here into the jug with the colourant in it, and you'll see how I work that colourant through to make sure that I'm going to get this really nice gradual change from dark to light colours. And it's actually quite surprising how much soap you can pour into the mould and still get a beautiful ombre. So I've gone with a clear mould here, so hopefully you can see pretty much what's going on as this soap builds up from the bottom. And we're going to pop some soap into here. Now I've poured in maybe 200 mils, 200 grams of my kind of 700 or 800 grams. It might even be less than that, just to give me this initial kind of phase of dark colour. And you can see how deep and dark that colour is. And I'm just making sure that I get all of my colourant that I've mixed into there correct into the mould here. I didn't fragrance this one because I just wanted to make sure I had enough time to be able to show you this. But again, when you're choosing a fragrance for this, you need to go for something that is going to be well behaved. It's going to either not touch the trace or even retard the trace so it doesn't trace quite so quickly. And ideally, you don't want something that's going to discolour because that will throw everything off. But because you're using one pot here, if the discoloration happens, it's going to happen across the board. But I do find a lighter colour on your batter will give you a better overall finished product. So I'll just fix my mould here. We're going to start with the first pour. Now the idea with this is you're basically going to wall pour down one of the sides, and then you're going to keep that angle for as long as you can and pour everything in at the same kind of angle. So I've done 2 swipes there to give me my first layer, a bit more white soap into this base layer. It's not going to be a great change at the moment, but we're going to get enough change in this to make sure that we see that colour happening. Mixing the white in enough so that you've got this really nice smooth batter, and scrape a little bit down the spout if you can, and then we're going to pour the next little bit in. Okay, so I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, ideally you want to do the same number of swipes, but if you don't, it doesn't matter. Always try and end on an even swipe, so you're ending at the same side and you're getting the same number of swipes across. And you continue doing this throughout the soap in order to build up those layers of colour changing. So you can see now this is probably slightly lighter than it was at the beginning. And then we're going to pour a little bit more in, because as you pour the white in, you're adding more white, but the colorant kind of sticks around. So I think we're going to go with 6 swipes here, but you can see now there's definitely been a color change in that batter. Don't be afraid of it. And don't try and think, oh, I've got to keep some. Go for it. Pour some into the mold, because you really will end up with just kind of a very static color difference if you don't go for it. But once again, don't try and pour it all out and leave yourself nothing, because you're going to get a very definitive stop where you've actually run out of colorant. So it's a little bit of a kind of learning process, this, and you really do need to kind of learn how it works. But again, you go back to the mold and you're pouring backwards and forwards down the wall, and you'll see that kind of building up. Unfortunately, I think the light was just shining on this one, so you couldn't really see it. But we'll come back to it in a little bit and you will see how that all works. Bit more colour into the pot and stir again. And it's literally just keep doing that. Have some cloth by the side, because you are going to make some drips and bits and pieces around. It's inevitable with this sort of pour, but it's quite fun. And once you get the hang of it, it really doesn't take very much time at all. I'll pop some music on now so you can watch the rest of this in real time, because I think it's worth watching it in real time to see exactly how long it does take. And we'll come back when we're towards the end of the pour. And so hopefully now you can see we've moved quite a way along, and we're virtually up to an almost white batter in this jug. You'll notice I'm still pouring from the original jug that I made the white batter in back into the jug with all the colourant in it. Now I do that because there's still going to be colourant floating in that batter. If I move straight to that other jug, there'll be such a jar of colour difference that it will be obvious. So you always want to make sure you're moving into that other jug, stirring in whatever is left at this point, because you want to get out any of the colourant that's left, and then pour that in, and eventually you will use up all of your batter here. So again, now we're just moving to the very, very kind of like edge of this mould now. We might want to move it down a little bit. If you're going to move this, you have to be very, very careful. Now, I've got one of these wonderful Cheshire Cat cradles for my soap, which allows me to kind of move things very, very gradually. You can do this with a balled up towel underneath your mould. When you move it to actually level it up again, just be really careful not to move it too quickly, otherwise everything will slop and you'll lose that beautiful gradient running through it. Just be a little bit careful when you are shifting this soap around, and just allow it to settle very carefully and very gently. And you can see here, I am scraping every last little bit out of this main jug still into my coloured jug. I'm working the pour from the coloured jug and never from the jug I made the lighter colour in. If you're going to do this in reverse, it works in exactly the same way, except at that initial stage where I poured a little bit into the colour, I will pour the majority of my soap into that colour, mix it up, and I'll do it in reverse. I'll be adding that darker colour into my lighter colour. Now, sometimes you might want to keep a little bit of that light over, because a dark into light can sometimes overpower that light way too much, and you may need a little bit of white to stop it. So you can see here, I'm just shifting everything a little bit, so I can just pull a little bit more of this batter in, and I'm being very, very careful how I do this. These little pins just stop it slipping backwards. Okay, I'm going to pour the very, very last bit of my soap in. Which is going to come in just here in a second. Just give me enough room to get that last little smidge of soap in, but making soap is expensive, and you want to get as much batter out of your jugs as you possibly can. So I'm going to pour this last little bit in, and then you'll see how carefully I stand this soap back up. Just a very little quick tip here. If you're getting to the end and you're kind of scraping your jug out, rather than trying to pour away from you and scrape away from you, you turn your entire mould round and then scrape your jug down and actually pour it into the mould, so it kind of hits the furthest wall, but you're able to scrape towards you. It just means you can get those kind of last little drips out, and it's all still in the same direction. You don't want to start changing direction when you do a pour like this. Otherwise, those steps become very, very obvious and very, very noticeable. So just a little tip there for doing that. And what we're going to do now is just very gently and very slowly stand this back up and allow everything just to kind of settle in its own time. Just like that. And then we'll take this off the stand and move on. So that was the Ombre soap, and we're now moving on to the gradient soap. Now the gradient soap takes a little bit more thinking depending on the number of colours you've got. Now I'm going to do a 3 colour gradient here. So in my jugs I've got my first colour, which is a deep red. I then got 2 jugs with exactly the same amount of colourant in them, and that's my transition colour from the dark through to the light. And then I've got my final colour, which is the orange colour, which is my lightest colour. And I'm going to divide my batter between these 4 jugs equally. But what it means is I'm going to work with my first 2 jugs first, which is the dark red and the transition colour. And I'm basically going to take my dark red and pour my transition colour into that red to create the red through into the transition colour. And then I'll move my second 2 jugs down. And again, I will work with my transition colour as my bottom, and I'll pour the lighter colour into that transition colour. So what it does is it allows us to get a really nice transition through the middle, and we're not kind of worrying about keeping anything over here or anything over here. I find this the best way of getting a really nice gradient soap together. Some people find they can do it with 3 jugs. I prefer to do it this way. So for every colour transition you have, the middle colour should have kind of 2 jugs that allow you to create that transition. Now, it's really important, I think, that if you're going to do a gradient like this, you want to work in the same spectrum. So what I don't want to do here is where I've got an orange, I don't really want to bring a blue in because that's going to go brown. If you mix red and yellow and blue together, you'll get brown. So I don't want to bring any of that kind of blue tone into here with the orange. If I wanted to bring a blue tone in, it's going to be at the bottom. So I'm going into like a purple, into a red, into then the orange. So be very careful about the colours that you choose. And on all of these jugs, you'll see there's little black markings. And those little black marks are essentially the weight of the jug. Now, I want to be able to divide this batter out equally. So I'm going to weigh the entire thing. I'm then going to take away the weight of the jug, and that will then allow me to divide up exactly how much batter I want to put in each one of these jugs. So let's get this batter divided up. And I'll pop this to a little bit of quick music, speed it up, and we'll come back as we start the pour. And so here we're back, and you'll see I pretty much do try and pour my batter either down the spout of the jug I'm pouring into, or at least down the wall. I'm trying to minimise as much air pockets and air bubbles in this batter as I can, because we are working it quite a lot. And again, this trace is exactly the same as the other one. Long work trace, try and use a fragrance oil that isn't going to accelerate, and ideally not going to discolour. But again, you might be able to use a discolouring fragrance oil in one portion and use an unfragranced batter in the other portion and allow that to pull through. It's entirely up to you. I wouldn't do that, but you can. So now you'll see here that I've got virtually the same amount of batter in each one of my jugs, and I'm just going to put 2 aside to work with in a little bit, and then I'm going to keep 2 that I'm going to work from. And you'll see one jug has got a large spout, which I'm going to pour out of, and the other one has got a narrow spout, which I'm going to use to pour into the other jug to create this gradient. So let's get ourselves kind of out of the way here. Bring in my mould. This is my second clear mould, so you can hopefully see what's going on. And you can basically see there are 2 different colours here, and the colour difference isn't going to be great, but it's going to be enough to give you that beautiful gradient transition. So first thing we're going to do is actually just pour in some of this straight colour to get our gradient started. Now you can afford to pour a fair amount of this into the mould, and I probably was a little soft on this one. I should have poured a little bit more of this base colour in, but again the gradient works out quite nicely. Pour a little bit of that colour in. We don't want to make the transition too great at the moment. I'm going to pour a little bit of that transition colour in, and essentially it's what we did for the ombre, but we're doing this in two separate sections, and we're moving from one colour into our transition colour and from our transition colour into our next colour. So what I'll do is once we get through these two jugs, I'll come back after the music and explain how we then move on to the next section of this pour. And we're actually at the end of this first kind of half of the pour, and you'll notice again, I'm only ever pouring out of one jug, and I'm moving the colour from basically my kind of vat of colour, transition colour, into my main colour. And then we're going to get as much of this colour out as we can. And again, at this point, gently, you can turn your mould around if you haven't got the dexterity and work it. But as long as you work on the same side, you'll always get this nice colour gradient, and you won't get any steps or anything like that in it. So once we get this last bit in, we'll move into going from our transition colour to our final colour. So that'll do for those colours. There's a little bit left in there, I'm not going to worry about that. And we're going to move on to the next one. Now again, this colour in the larger nozzled jug is the transition colour we had that we poured into our first colour. But this time, that's going to act as our pouring jug, and we're going to pour our final colour into here. So we're working it in exactly the same way. Now we put the pure colour in this time. So we have basically finished with any of that mix that's gone before it, and putting quite a bit in there as well. And this pour works in exactly the same as we've done all of the other pours. We work from one jug that we pour into the mould, and we use our other jug full of colour to change the colour or the tone or the hue in the jug we're working from. We only ever pour into the mould from that jug. It works exactly the same way. I'll pop some music onto this one. You can see this in real time and see how this all comes together. And then we'll come back for the cut. And so here we are back with the cut. Now you'll see on the purple one, I've got this kind of ragged line. This was the fight I had with the soap to get it out of the mould, but it will plane up beautifully. So we're not going to worry about that one too much. And here we go with our ombre. So you can see how we've got that dark moving through into the real light at the top there. And we've got our gradient, again, moving from one colour into another. So let's take a look at these ones in a little bit more high colour and less out of focus. There we go, that's a better shot of these soaps in all of their glory. So you'll see how the colours kind of graduate from one through into the other. You can see where all of those kind of less than equal amounts of soap have created the striations through it. And there's no doubt this is a fantastic technique, and hopefully once and for all we've let you see exactly what a gradient is and exactly what an ombre is. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps me grow and allows me to make more videos and tutorials for all of you. When you subscribe, don't forget to click the bell icon to get notified when a new video is uploaded. And thanks a lot, soapsters. I'll see you again next time.